Welcome, everyone. Today we're taking a deep dive into the world of bows and arrows.
Sounds exciting.
Yeah, I found this really in-depth Wikipedia article on the topic.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and well, I have to admit,
Yeah.
I thought I knew a little bit about bows and arrows.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like medieval times, knights, all that. But glancing at this article, I was way off.
Interesting.
It's way more ancient and complex than I ever imagined.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you, like, how far back does this technology actually go? Like, what's the earliest evidence?
Well, prepare to be amazed. The oldest evidence we have takes us all the way back to Sabudu Cave in South Africa. Archaeologists have found arrowheads there that date back an incredible 72,000 years.
72,000 years. I
Yeah.
mean, that's just mind-blowing. So we're talking early humans using bows and arrows. What were they hunting with, though? Like, what were they hunting?
Well, these early arrowheads, they were small, but they were likely used for hunting small game. It just shows how crucial this technology was for survival, even way back then.
Wow, that makes sense. South Africa, the cradle of humankind.
Yeah.
But then this article mentions even older evidence. In Sri Lanka.
Right. The Fahim Cave in Sri Lanka has actually yielded arrowheads estimated to be around 48,000 years old. So it suggests that the spread of the bow and arrow was much earlier and wider than we originally thought.
So it's like rewriting prehistory.
Exactly.
And to make things even more interesting, there's the discovery of those tiny arrowheads in France, too, right?
Yes, those date back 54,000 years, and they're incredibly small, less than 10 millimeters across. Researchers think that these miniature arrowheads might be connected to the early migrations of modern humans out of Africa. Imagine those journeys carrying these tools, essential for survival.
Wow, it really puts those early migrations into perspective. So if we're talking about bows and arrows spreading out of Africa and across continents, like tens of thousands of years ago, was it pretty much a universal tool after that? I mean, did everybody use it?
Yeah, after the last ice age, about 12,000 years ago, bows were used pretty much everywhere. There is one big exception, though.
Oh?
Australia. And most of Oceania. It's still a bit of a mystery why they never adopted the bow and arrow.
Fascinating. I mean, what weapons did they use then? Okay, so we've been talking about arrowheads, but what about the oldest actual bows that have been found? Does the article mention any specific ones?
For that, let's head to Denmark.
Okay.
The Holmgard bows, they're crafted from elm wood, and they date back to an incredible 9,000 BCE. And what's really amazing is that they're so well preserved.
Wow.
They offer a glimpse into early bow-making techniques.
9,000 BCE. I mean, it's just phenomenal. And I read that, like, the home guard design is still relevant today.
Yeah, the design elements are really enduring. Modern bowyers even find inspiration in those ancient techniques.
That's amazing. Talk about ingenuity. But it's not all success stories, right?
Yeah.
Wasn't there something about bow fragments that were lost during World War II?
Sadly, yes. Fragments of the Stelmore bow from Germany, also estimated to be around 8,000 BCE, were lost during the war. It's a huge loss for archaeology. Imagine the knowledge we could have gained from studying them.
Yeah, it's really heartbreaking to think about. Okay, so we've established that bows and arrows are ancient, they're widespread, but let's shift gears a little bit and talk about warfare. Just how important were bows and arrows on the battlefield?
Well, from prehistory all the way to the rise of gunpowder in the 16th century, bows were basically essential. I mean, they dominated for millennia.
Millennia. I mean, that really puts things into perspective. Were there any specific cultures that were, like, really known for their archery skills?
Absolutely. Well, the Nubian archers, for example, they were so skilled that their land was actually called Land of the Bow by the ancient Egyptians.
The land of the bow. That really says it all. And of course, there's the English longbow, which was like a game changer during the medieval period, right?
Yeah. The English longbow was definitely formidable, known for its power and accuracy. It's really interesting to contrast it with, say, the shorter bows favored by the Mongols.
Oh, right. Different strategies.
Exactly. The Mongols prioritized mobility and rapid firing on horseback.
So different bows for different situations. That makes sense. But did the use of bows and arrows in warfare, like, did it kind of end with the medieval period?
Not at all. Even as firearms became more prevalent, bows and arrows continued to be used. For example, Native Americans relied heavily on them during colonization. And in the Arctic, bow hunting persisted well into the 20th century.
Wow, I had no idea. So are bows and arrows kind of relegated to just sport and recreation these days? Or are they still used tactically at all?
Well, they are popular for sport and recreation, but you might be surprised to know that they're still used in some tactical situations.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear more about that.
Like special forces units, for example,
Mhm.
they've been known to utilize bows and arrows for survival and stealth operations. It just goes to show that even ancient technologies, they can still find a place in our modern world.
Absolutely. It's like this technology has truly stood the test of time. So now that I'm starting to grasp the historical significance, I'd love to kind of get a better understanding of how they actually work. Can we delve into the technical side a bit?
Sure, at its core, a bow is actually a really simple machine. It's all about storing energy and releasing it to propel an arrow.
It sounds simple enough, but I'm sure there's more to it. What are the key components that make it all work?
Well, let's start with the limbs. Those are the curved, flexible parts that give the bow its shape. And those limbs, they're connected by what's called the riser, which is the central grip. And then, of course, you've got the bowstring attached to the tips of the limbs. When you pull back on the string, you're essentially bending those limbs and storing energy, kind of like a spring.
So it's all about tension and release. The further you pull back, the more power you get.
Exactly. The amount of force needed to draw the bow, that's called the draw weight, and the distance you pull it back, that's the draw length. So a stronger archer, they can handle a higher draw weight, and a taller archer, they'll usually have a longer draw length.
It's about finding the right fit.
Exactly.
We've been focusing on the bow itself, but what about the arrow? It's not just a simple stick with a pointy end, is it?
The arrow is a carefully designed projectile with several important components. You have the shaft, which is the main body, and the arrowhead at the front.
Shaft and arrowhead, those are the parts I'm familiar with. What else is there?
At the back of the arrow, you have the fletching, which are typically feathers or veins. They basically act like stabilizers, making sure the arrow flies straight. And then you have the nock, which is that little groove at the very end that fits onto the bowstring.
So there's more to an arrow than I realized. Each element plays a role. But this Wikipedia article mentions all these different types of bows. Are we talking minor variations here, or are there really distinct designs?
Oh, there's a whole world of bow designs out there, each with unique characteristics and purposes. We can categorize them by their shape, materials used, and even their historical significance.
That sounds like a journey I'm ready for.
Mm-hmm.
Let's explore the world of bow designs.
One way to classify bows is by their side view profile.
Okay.
You've got the classic straight bow, which is pretty self-explanatory.
Straightforward.
Exactly. And then you have the recurve bow with tips that curve away from the archer.
Oh, I see.
This design gives the arrow more speed and power.
Makes sense.
And then there are reflex bows,
Okay.
where the entire limb curves away from the archer when it's unstrung.
So even more curve.
Yeah. And that stores even more energy.
More power.
Exactly, making it a powerful choice for hunting and warfare.
Right? It's all about maximizing that power.
Absolutely.
So we've got straight bows, recurve bows, reflex bows. What else?
Well, another way to categorize bows is by the materials used.
Oh.
So you have self bows, which are made from a single piece of wood. Simple.
And then you have composite bows,
Okay.
which combine different materials like wood, horn, and sinew.
Composite bows, those sound pretty high tech, especially for ancient times.
They were incredibly advanced for their time. The different materials, they work together to create a bow that's stronger and more efficient.
Wow.
Think of it like early engineering.
Like a symphony of materials.
Exactly.
So we've got shape, material. Are there any specific types of bows that stand out, either historically or because of their unique design?
Oh, absolutely. The longbow immediately comes to mind.
Ah, the classic.
A classic self-bow, typically as tall as the archer. Think Robin Hood.
Oh, yeah, the iconic English longbow.
Exactly.
I always imagine those being made from a particular type of wood.
You're right.
Was it?
You would.
You would, okay.
It was prized for its strength and flexibility, ideal for longbows.
What other, famous bows should I know about?
Well, there's the flat bow, where the limbs are rectangular in cross-section.
Many Native American tribes favored this design.
So each culture kind of developed its own bow based on their, needs and the resources they had available.
Absolutely. And then as we move closer to modern times,
Yeah.
you have the takedown bow,
Okay.
which can be taken apart for easier transport.
Makes sense.
And then the compound bow,
Oh, yeah.
which is really a marvel of engineering.
Yeah.
Using pulleys and cables to increase power and accuracy.
Compound bows. Those are what you typically see at the Olympics and stuff, right?
Exactly. They're popular for target archery and bow hunting today.
Cool.
Then there's the crossbow, which functions more like a firearm, really,
Right.
with its stock and trigger mechanism,
Yeah.
making it quite distinct from a traditional bow.
Yeah, it's almost like a bridge between like the ancient world and the modern world of weaponry,
You could say that.
and then any others.
Well, we can't forget the foot bow.
The foot bow.
Yes.
What's that?
It's drawn using both hands and feet. It's actually responsible for some of the longest arrow shots ever recorded.
I never would have imagined that.
It's a unique design.
The variety of bow designs is just incredible.
It is.
But we can't forget about the arrowheads.
Right.
I imagine they varied quite a bit depending on their purpose.
Oh, absolutely. Arrowheads were specifically designed with certain tasks in mind.
Like what?
Well, one of the most well-known is the bodkin.
Right.
Basically a simple spike designed to pierce armor.
Sounds pretty intense.
Yeah, it was incredibly effective on the medieval battlefield.
I bet.
And then you have broadheads,
Okay.
wider arrowheads with sharpened edges, mainly used for hunting.
So bodkins for piercing, broadheads for hunting. What other types were there?
There are piles, which are simple cones used for target shooting.
So just for practice.
Right, they don't have the sharp edges of a broadhead.
Makes sense.
And then for smaller game or birds, they used blunt heads,
Oh.
designed to stun or kill without penetrating too deeply.
I imagine that made it easier to retrieve the arrows too.
Exactly. Less damage.
And lastly, you have barbed heads,
Barbs.
commonly used in both warfare and hunting. The barbs made it really difficult to remove the arrow, causing more damage.
Wow. I can see why bows and arrows were so effective for such a long time.
It's a fascinating combination of technology and strategy.
We've covered the bow, the arrowheads, but what about the bowstring?
Ah, the bowstring.
It seems like a crucial part.
It's essential. It transfers the energy from the limbs to the arrow.
Right.
It needs to be incredibly strong to withstand that force.
So what materials were used to make bowstrings, like back in the day?
Historically, they used a variety of natural fibers.
Like what?
Flax, silk, hemp,
Okay.
animal guts, even rawhide.
Wow, that's quite a range.
It really shows human ingenuity, finding ways to create this critical component from the resources they had.
I imagine those materials had to be carefully processed to make them strong enough.
Oh, absolutely. Are any of those traditional materials still used today?
Some are, but modern bowstrings often use synthetic materials like Dacron and Kevlar.
Oh yeah, those names sound familiar.
They're known for exceptional strength.
Aren't those materials used in, like, bulletproof vests and stuff?
You got it.
Wow.
And some compound bows even use steel cables.
These cables.
It's amazing how far we've come.
From animal guts to steel cables. That's a huge leap.
It really is. But it's interesting, even with those advancements, nylon can still be used in emergencies, although it tends to stretch a bit.
Affecting accuracy.
Exactly. And despite the advancement in materials, the techniques for making bowstrings are still rooted in tradition.
What do you mean?
Well, there's this specific twisting technique called the Flemish twist. It's been used for centuries.
Centuries, wow.
To create strong, consistent bowstrings.
Flemish twist. It sounds like a step from a complicated dance.
It does have a certain elegance to it, but it's a very effective method.
Speaking of effectiveness, I'm curious about those compound bows we mentioned earlier. They seem so precise.
They are.
How do they achieve that level of accuracy?
Compound bows are unique.
Yeah.
They use a system of cams, which are essentially eccentric wheels,
Cams, okay.
to create what's called a mechanical advantage.
So it's like having a built-in power boost.
Exactly.
Wow.
This allows the archer to hold the bow at full draw with less effort, leading to increased stability and accuracy.
Sounds incredibly efficient.
That is.
But with all these advancements, what makes the bow and arrow so enduring? I mean, it's persisted alongside firearms and all sorts of other weapons.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I think it comes down to its simplicity.
Simplicity. I mean, we've been talking about all these complexities.
But at its core, the principle is simple. Storing energy, releasing it,
Right.
no complicated mechanisms.
Reliable.
Exactly. Easy to maintain,
Yeah.
even in tough conditions.
And what about effectiveness?
A bow and arrow in the right hands can be incredibly accurate and lethal even from a distance.
Yeah.
It demands skill and precision, which is part of its appeal, I think.
So there's a real connection between the archer and the tool.
Absolutely.
And what about adaptability?
Yeah.
We talked about how different cultures adapted the bow and arrow to their own need.
Exactly. The bow and arrow can be adapted for so many purposes, from hunting to warfare, target shooting, even survival situations.
Right.
The basic design can be modified to meet almost any need.
So it's not just a weapon or a sporting tool.
Right.
It's a symbol of human ingenuity, adaptability.
I like that.
Yeah.
It really is. The bow and arrow symbolizes resourcefulness and our fascination with, well, with elegant yet effective technology.
I'm completely captivated by this journey into the world of bows and arrows.
Me too.
I came in thinking I knew a little something, but it turns out I barely scratched the surface.
There's always more to learn.
It's amazing.
It's a fascinating subject.
I'm feeling inspired to explore this further.
You should.
Maybe even try my hand at archery.
It's a great activity.
But before I run off to find an archery range,
Okay.
are there any, common misconceptions about bows and arrows that you'd like to clear up?
Yeah, there are a few.
Okay.
One I hear a lot is that crossbows are easier to use than traditional bows.
I can see why people would think that.
Right. I mean, they do require less strength to draw back, but they still need precision and skill to be effective.
So it's not just like point and shoot.
No, not at all.
Right.
Plus, they take longer to reload.
Oh, right.
And they can have mechanical issues that you just wouldn't get with a traditional bow.
That makes sense.
Another misconception is that all bows are, basically the same.
Yeah, I can see that.
But in reality, there's a huge variety in design and materials, each with its own advantages and disadvantages.
So it's not like one size fits all.
Exactly. Choosing the right bow depends on what you're using it for, your skill level, all sorts of things.
Right, like anything else.
And finally, people often underestimate the importance of technique. It's not just about pulling back a string and letting go.
Right.
There's a whole art to it. Your stance, your grip, your aim, how you release the arrow.
Takes practice.
It really does. It takes time and practice to master.
So it's a discipline that rewards patience and dedication.
Absolutely. It's a journey of learning and refinement.
Well, I have to say this deep dive has been incredible.
It's been fun.
Yeah, it really has.
It's a topic I love talking about.
I've gained a whole new appreciation for bows and arrows, not just as weapons or sporting tools, but as a reflection of history, ingenuity, cultural expression.
Absolutely. It's all intertwined.
I'm walking away with a whole new perspective.
I'm glad to hear that.
It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Likewise.
And for our listeners, if this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, we encourage you to explore further. Visit an archery range, read more about the history, maybe even try crafting your own bow and arrows.
It's a fascinating world.
It really is. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey through the world of bows and arrows. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.